of the West following World War II, the idea that because of the West's like material success, right, we have a moral deficiency, right, because we all want to stay home and play our Xboxes. We want to stay home and I don't know, play ping pong or tennis or whatever. There wasn't even like an Atari yet. But like, we're all have this material comfort. We have 2 chickens in every pot, 2 cars in every driveway, 2.4 kids, right, and a puppy. That we're not really engaged in the world affairs as far as what's moral. Instead, we're just kind of looking for easy ways out, or at least our politicians or the bureaucrats who are running the country are, right? And so because of this, he thinks it's actually creating a danger for the world because of the relations with Russia at that point in time, the possible global thermonuclear war that could have been awaiting. And basically the other point too, right, there's a misunderstanding of the East, meaning Russia in this case, of any culture that's not uniquely Western in his opinion, because America and the West does not look at the culture as uniquely autonomous and valuable by itself, right? They're looking at it with the Western point of view of measuring it with a Western yardstick instead of actually looking at what's going on in that culture and looking at the values and societal, attributes that culture generates organically or has generated organically. And because of that, the West is always going to misunderstand and then misrespond to the things that are going on around the world. All right. All right, cool, here we go. Yeah. Over the conceptual. Oh, no. All right, okay. A declining courage may be the most striking feature. We already did that too, dang. There we go. Okay, there we really are. When the modern Western states were created, the principle was proclaimed that governments are meant to serve man and man lives to be free and pursue happiness. See, for example, the Declaration of Independence. We did that too, actually, my bad. All right, here we go. Wow. In today's Western society, even if we did this, we'll catch it before we were. In today's Western society, the inequality has been revealed in freedom for good deeds and freedom from evil deeds. A statesman who wants to achieve something important and highly constructive for his country has to move cautiously and even timidly. There are thousands of hasty and irresponsible critics around him. Parliament and the press keep rebuffing him. As he moves ahead, he has to prove that each single step of his well-founded and absolutely flawless. Actually, an outstanding and particularly gifted person who has unusual and unexpected initiatives in mind, hardly gets a chance to assert himself. From his very beginning, dozens of traps we set out for him, thus mediocrity triumphs with the excuse of restrictions imposed by democracy. And we covered that before, but I think it's an important point, right? What is that saying about intellectual development and people who are actually making policies or being elected in Western countries? Like, what's the number one requirement if you want to be elected for public office, he's saying, at a national level in a Western country? Like, you say y'all want to run for office, okay? Like, right now, because y'all can run for, like, city council or mayor, probably, right? Well, I'm mayor of Odessa. What's the worst thing you could do for your candidacy as mayor, according to Solzhenitsyn? Or maybe just in general, of your own initiative or your own intuition. If you want to be mayor, what's the worst thing you could do for yourself and your candidacy? Say what? Yeah, actually being honest and doing what you promised would be bad, right? But you could probably get elected first before they figure that out, right? They kind of have to trust that you're going to do what you promised, right? That's a good point, though. You'd never get a second term. What should a politician do if they want to be elected democratically in the Western world, according to Solzhenitsyn? What should they not do? Well, like the media, whoever's covering it, right, is going to point out the flaws. Like if you say anything like this, like rocking the boat a bit, right, the media's going to be all over it, and then you're probably DOA as far as your candidacy goes. So if the media is going to point out any flaws, what's the one thing you must never do or show that you haven't, right? So if you say something that's controversial, like it's an idea that might solve problems actually, right, and outside the box thinking, or a promise that's actually going to mean change in a real positive way, the worst thing you could do is to announce that to the world, because you'd be criticized for the revolutionary nature of it, be criticized for the fact that it might not work, and you'll probably piss like 48% of the people off anyways, because they don't want what you want to have changed, right? And the media will cover that in such a sensational way, says Solzhenitsyn, that you'll never get elected because only that will be the news story, right? Not the actual change you want to make or what's good. The fact that you have an original idea that's never been tried before, never been thought of before, or actually might help something will become the story, right? And so his point is that this basically destroys the idea of democracy or the benefit of democracy, because anybody who could actually do something positive or change something or has an original thought is immediately sidelined and blacklisted by the electorate and the media, right? And so you get these kind of vanilla, middle-of-the-road politicians who are platitudes only, and don't actually intend on doing anything, or always like the safe choice, the moderate choice, or the choice that is exactly the same as every person that's ever come before them, right? And so that's what he's saying the danger is. You get this kind of, the soft bigotry of low expectations for politicians, right? Nobody expects them to do anything great or have any actual ideas. And so that's what we get, right? That's his argument. All right. It is feasible and easy everywhere to undermine the administrative power, and in fact, it has been drastically weakened in all Western countries. The defense of individual rights has reached such extremes as to make society as a whole defenseless against certain individuals. It is time in the West. Whoa, he said it twice. To defend not so much human rights as human obligations. We talked about that at the end of last class period, right? Like what it means to have obligations to each other. Obligations are things that we have to do because we respect the other person, right? So I was thinking about it over the weekend, and it's kind of a different point of view. So you have the I perspective, the first person, right? Like I think, I feel, I do, right? You think of things like a second personal perspective, like the you, right? What happened? Oh, there it is. Like the you. I think of everything in terms of what it does to you, right? Or what it does to anybody else, right? Then that's a way of looking at it in terms of obligations. Like if I don't think about what I'm entitled to do, but what I ought to do to you, or I ought to do considering that you are there, right? That's a kind of a different moral flip on the whole situation, right? So we're talking about obligations. I don't have any obligations to myself really, other than probably eat and get enough sleep every night, so I'm not dying of starvation if I can help that, right? But I ought to be the same to help other people be the best I can, not impinge upon their rights of freedom as much as possible, right? I have obligations to treat other people, at least as good as I want to be treated, maybe better, right? That's what I would think at least, right? So instead of thinking things from what can I do and get away with, maybe we should think of things in terms of what are my obligations to other people, right? To think of the you instead of the I. All right. All right. Destructive and irresponsible freedom has been granted boundless space. Society appears to have little defense against the abyss of human decadence, such as, for example, the misuse of liberty for moral violence against young people, such as the motion pictures full of pornography, crime, and horror. It is considered to be part of freedom and theoretically counterbalanced by the young people's right not to look at it or not to accept it. Life organized legalistically has thus shown its inability to defend itself against the corrosion of evil. Now, this seems a little bit like Ayn Rand's whole well, kids today just kind of escape reality by being on the drug, right? That proves we're all effed up and wrong, right? I think this is a little bit different, maybe a little more tenable, right? So, how y'all feel about the movie pictures, the motion pictures, the flicks, the cinema today? Is it full of pornography and violence and horror? No? I don't know. I don't go to movies anymore. Even before COVID, I don't go to movies. What do you think? Maybe not movies, but just culture in general, right? Are those things a problem? Do those pose a danger or a problem to a people, a young generation at all? If not, okay, cool. If they do, is the fact they're accessible in the movies or without any kind of checks or without any kind of limited access, does that pose a problem? This is a personal philosophical argument, right, that Solzhenitsyn's making. I think we might disagree with him on the majority of this, right? I want to think about this in class, though. Is it destructive and irresponsible freedom to be able to view whatever you want, whenever you want it, even if it's violent or pornographic or, has moral violence or horror, like a horror movie like Saw, everybody's Saw? Well, Solzhenitsyn would probably be appalled. I have no idea. What do you think? Can there be too much information or too much access to things? Can a movie, a piece of artistic creation, commit moral violence? Or does that sound like too dictatorish, communistic, crazy talk? Remember, Solzhenitsyn's from Russia, where Stalin was. Stalin like had put the gulag, right? So he's kind of used to that. But does that sound like something like the U.S. we should be for? Like Stalin is just too horrible. He inflicts moral violence on the young people. We should ban it entirely. Say what? So you choose whether or not to go, right? So what role does the government have, or should the government have, in controlling what people can view or see? Any? Well, it's not crime, right? Either way. I mean, I don't think he's arguing like, okay, like the Columbine shooters listened to Eminem, and that's why they shot up Columbine. I don't think that's quite the connection, right? But he's saying like that regardless of what the people do themselves in the world, right, them consuming this kind of material is a moral violence being committed on them. I think is his argument. But you would say like, it's their choice, right? That sounds fair. How do we feel about that? I don't only have thoughts on this, but if I was like, no more TikTok ever, I'm the government, slap. I mean, or no more whatever. Mm-hmm. Right. Soda. That sucks. That's soda. It's supposed to be cream soda. That sucks. It was. It's like 90 degrees because it's outside. That's dangerous. Sorry, y'all. Sorry, you were saying the moral violence of Fahrenheit 451. You appreciate the warning? Oh. So like trigger warnings or content warnings are different than like banning altogether? Fair enough. How else do you feel? Should there be any kind of restriction or ban on material and this is by the government, right? Not like if we're a school or your church or whatever. You're not. I mean, obviously, if you're like a church and showing movies, you're not going to show Saw, probably, right? Well, that's not like the youth group, right? Well, depends on what church, I guess. But yeah. So the government imposed rights about the moral decisions of other people, right? About access to content, not moral. So what? Right. So the access shouldn't be restricted is because people have the right to choose, the freedom to choose, right? All right. Fair enough. Let's see what he does with that then, right? So what's his whole point in mentioning that? He's saying that when people have access to this, when there's a moral violence committed on people, right? It's not that it's necessarily evil in and of itself, right? Or that people are being like inflicted and like traumatized by this, right? He says that the legal frames is a problem, right? So he says, okay. And what should we say? Yeah, criminally as such. Legal frames, especially in the United States, are broad enough to encourage not only individual freedom, but also certain individual crimes. The culprit can go unpunished or obtain undeserved leniency with the support of thousands of public defenders. When the government starts an earnest fight against terrorism, public opinion immediately discusses it violating the terrorist civil rights. There are many such cases. So he's saying that there is, so for example, talk about the Patriot Act, right? You know about the Patriot Act? You ever heard of the Patriot Act? Who served the Patriot Act? For real? George Bush, yeah? Dick Cheney, right? Yeah. Another, okay, let's go over the Patriot Act real quick. Sorry, I assumed stuff. That's my bad. I guess it's like, shoot, 2001. How old were you if you were born in 2001? 19, right? Damn. So some of y'all weren't even alive when like 9/11 happened, huh? I'm old as hell. Or you're like one. I don't think you remember if you're like one. All right, so the Patriot Act, right, was a governmental executive order passed and then ratified really quickly by Congress that allowed the government to spy on U.S. citizens, to collect data, to like intercept phone calls. They have drones fly overhead. They basically have access to all kinds of stuff that was protected by the Fourth Amendment beforehand, right? Warrantless searches, warrantless data collection, warrantless spying on U.S. citizens with the hopes that they would catch terrorists who may or may not be U.S. citizens by collecting everybody's data, right? So there was a thing set up in the Reagan administration called the FISA Court. This is before the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act took use of the FISA Court, which stood for the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, right? Which is basically like in America, in order for them to get a warrant on you, right? They have to present, the government has to come present its case to a grand jury. A grand jury is like 12 randos who are in a room, right? And you don't get to appear in front of the grand jury and defend yourself, but the government has to say, okay, look, we have evidence they did a crime, right? And the grand jury says, okay, cool, like go investigate it. And there's a saying that probably nobody's heard that the grand jury would indict a ham sandwich. Meaning that it's very easy for those 12 randos in the room without you sitting there defending yourself to say, yeah, sure, go get a search warrant, whatever, right? So it's a very low standard. Search warrants get issued all the time by grand juries that shouldn't be issued probably. Well, FISA court is even worse. There's no grand jury. There's nobody defending your rights or anything. It's just the government saying, hey, we think that Joe might be a terrorist. Can we tap his phone and do whatever we want to his records and his bank statements and his whatever? And there's a judge who nobody gets to know who they are, and a courtroom that nobody gets to access to, and no media is allowed, no decisions are recorded or actually covered, right? Who says, yeah, tap their life, whatever, right? And so the Patriot Act authorized use of FISA courts for not only international people who aren't citizens, but American citizens too. And so from that point on, the Bush administration kind of went crazy on, and then the Obama administration continued actually, and just kind of spying on everybody and like getting all their data and oops, like somebody like Edward Snowden, everybody hear Edward Snowden, never maybe. He found out a bunch of that stuff and leaked it all to WikiLeaks or whatever, which is not a great group of guys, but whatever. People found out that like the government was like monitoring all of our like webcams and all of our like Facebook live chats and all of our freaking like emails and phone calls and data and the websites we visited, had it all in this like big global database, right? So the whole point he's saying is that, okay, so they're going to use ideas of, you know, freedom or whatever to let terrorists escape. So this is before the Patriot Act, right? Patriot Act kind of put into this in the other way. Basically, he's saying that, well, it kind of happens too. Like, so you remember the Boston City bombing, Boston Marathon bombing? It's more recent, right? Tsarnaev, what's his name? Tamerlan Tsarnaev. Anyway, so he gets arrested after trying to, you know, or successfully blowing up a bunch of people in Boston and going on the lam and gets down on a boat in some suburb of Boston, somebody's backyard, like hiding out. And they arrest him, and there's a civil rights action that says he needs constitutional rights. He needs a lawyer provided to his, you know, at the government's expense, even though he's not a citizen. Why? Because he has like human rights, and he has rights to attorney, rights to face his accuser, et cetera, et cetera. And this is without being a citizen, right? This is without his. I mean, this is after like murdering like 40 people and injuring like 120 others, right? And it's not like it was like, did he actually do that or not? No, like. He admits to that. There's video of that, right? And so this is kind of what he's saying is like when we have rights that are like protected just because they're rights, right? And they're not actually serving the interests of justice, then it allows bad people to do stuff and get away with it, or at least delay their punishment, right? So this is the thing the United States is always trying to balance, right? Is like, okay, if we let like somebody like Tsarnaev get a lawyer for free and actually fight things out, maybe not even, you know, get the death sentence, maybe get off and get released eventually, right? Is that okay justice-wise versus having one person innocently who's innocent given a death penalty? Like, what's the balance on that, right? So either you allow people a chance to get off and prove their innocence to an extreme, right? Or you just put the hammer on people and maybe have innocent people without the right to defense or put away, right? Does that make sense? So he's saying right here that the danger with too much freedom is that people who are guilty will walk, right? People who are guilty of bad things will be able to find excuses for those bad things and not be punished for it. What do we think about that? Is that what's the more, I guess, great danger in y'all's minds? That like the government will punish somebody who's innocent too much, so they'll look at them, not give them access to defense and not give them access to their rights, or that they'll let somebody who's like terrible off? What poses the great? What do y'all think? I mean, y'all are, you know, be charged adults with crimes now? Well, of course you do. Or at least, yeah, you know, they don't get off, they get like not much, right? Jeffrey, oh, he didn't make it. Yeah. Right. So if you have money, you can get out of the system, right? What if those people who don't have money are stuck in the system? Is it better for the culprit to go unpunished or to have people punished who are not culprits? Does that make sense? The word culprit might be ambiguously used there. It's better to put an innocent person to death or have 10 people who are guilty not get death sentence. Like, which is better, you think, for society, for a country, for a moral standard?
I don't believe the death sentence. I don't think anyone should use the death sentence. Like, I get that some people do like some real bad things.
Sure.
But life in prison, I think that's the easy way out. Like, some people should not be allowed that. Some people should have to sit and rot in the prison cell for 70 plus years before they did it and have to deal with life and what other people may do to them in there. That's what they deserve.
Yeah. Are we all for like just like putting people in a hole, like a hellish hole, and letting them live forever instead of killing them? We really in like torture as opposed to death penalty? I would agree. Taxes? Oh, we're paying for them to be alive forever, you mean? It's just cheaper on the taxpayer to kill them all. I mean, monetary, that's a good point, right? Because this is something politicians will argue, right? Let's look at the nickels and dimes, right? Like, it's going to cost us less money if we can put somebody to death. Let's just wax them all, right? That's kind of, you know.
At least if we tailor money in the right way.
Well, there are some people who come out of jail that like rebuild their lives. Like, it doesn't make up for what they did, but sometimes they come out of jail and fix everything. They get a job and do everything that they're supposed to.
Okay. So this leads us to a bigger question in general, right? Is what should the purpose of a justice system be? Should it be retributive? Should it be to get vengeance and enact like, punishment on those who wronged others? Or should it be restorative? Should it be rehabilitative? Should the goal be to reintegrate somebody who committed a crime into society in a productive fashion? Right? I think the argument he's making here, right, is from, the Russian perspective, which is he was just in a gulag for like 30 years plus because he said Stalin was a jackass. Right? So let's say they're a very retributive system, right? There's no hope of you going to the gulag and all of a sudden becoming like a great person who loves Stalin and coming out and like, maybe you'll do that just so you can get out, but you're not going to actually love Stalin, right? So that's a very retributive justice system, right? You're getting vengeance on people who've broken the law and hurt others. A restorative justice system, like we're talking about too, right, or a rehabilitative one, is the idea that people should be somehow given a chance to atone for their wrongs and then rejoin society as a fully integrated member. Those two different systems make sense, what I'm saying? Do you understand what I'm saying by saying those two terms? Yeah? How do we think our priorities lie or should lie? How's it hard? I mean, I agree it's hard. How's it hard?
There's a lot of different things that people do, like tax fraud or like just something like small, or you could rape a girl and kill her, or something like there's extreme
Right.
things that aren't as big. I mean, they are a big deal still, it's a crime, but
Right, but what about like not paying a traffic ticket for running a stop sign and then having a bench warrant put out and being arrested for not showing up in court for failed to stop at a stop sign ticket? You're still in jail. Right? Right.
because like if someone does something to you, you're probably not going to have good feelings towards them. You're not going to want to do that.
True. So there's a victim, right? It's a different situation. There's a victimless crime.
You're going to be scared of them or
Right. Or worry about retribution, whatever, in the physical way. Sure. Right. And then there's a federal law, right?
yeah, like one thing is someone to be so much more racist, like
Crazy.
New Mexico, they don't, if you still go back to New Mexico, they don't let.
They don't come get you. So you just gotta go around New Mexico if you're going to California from now on. Right. How high? I'm not gonna ask how high your speed is. Like you go like 75 over. Oh.
I was going at 95 and 75.
Not bad.
But
I mean, we're going like 95 in a school zone. Like, yeah, everybody does, regardless if it's okay or not, right? Crazy. Right. Oh, no big deal at all. Yeah. So we have. All right. And a lawyer cost.
and I couldn't get it off my record.
Damn.
Oh, it's crazy. And they suspended my license.
That was like $200 to get reinstated, right? Right? So how, this is confession day. We're just gonna say all of our wrongs. Is that the plan? What did you get arrested for? You didn't mean to? Did your grandma in the car?
No, she came, like, she came up, and she was talking to me, they let me go,
Damn.
nothing.
Damn. Okay. The point being, right, is that there are different. So the point in all of this, right, is that in a country as big as the United States or as big as the Soviet Union, which is bigger, right, there are different systems in different municipalities and states and stuff, right? So if we're gonna say, as a nation, even just morally, right, what's right or wrong, right, or we're gonna allow, there to be restrictions that are federally mandated for everybody, right? Is that better for the country than allowing the maximization of freedoms, right? Meaning that, okay, so for example, with speeding laws, right? Like Oklahoma is free to do whatever the hell it wants with its tickets and crazy stuff, right? And Texas is free to not be as crazy, right? Montana is free to be less crazy, right? But is there a danger or a risk that he's talking about here if the government is like allowing people to maximize chance to be free, that all of a sudden, like, there'll be a moral laxity, a moral violence committed on people in other ways, right? Like we can watch whatever you want if no websites are restricted, right? Or there's no, nothing out like movie ratings or whatever. I remember back in the day, like they actually held 2 movie ratings. Like there's a rated R movie you couldn't get in unless you like had an ID when you were 17. I don't know if they do that anymore at all. Like, at least in Wyoming they did. There's probably like 35 people in Wyoming, so they can bother all this at one time. But like, yeah, like we tried to go see what was it? Aliens. I'm really old. And like it was rated R, they wouldn't let us in because we were like not 17, we were like 12. So like, should there be restrictions on that, right? He's saying there should be because it's the government's duty or the duty of society, right, to not allow freedom to run rampant. I'm not sure if we agree with him or not, but he's going to make his case. We'll actually look at when he flushes it out, okay? So I want to read this paragraph, the subject tilt of freedom. My voice is running out. Please.
Such a tilt of freedom in the direction of evil has come about gradually, but it was evidently born primarily out of a humanistic and benevolent concept, according to which there is no evil inherent to human nature. The world belongs to mankind, and all of the defects of life are caused by wrong social systems, which must be corrected. Strangely enough, though the best social conditions have been achieved in the West, there still is criminality, and there even is considerably more of it than the proper and lawless Soviet society.
Right? So we're saying, right, like, so where does evil come from? Is the argument here. This is like a foundational philosophical argument, right? Are people inherently effed up and jackasses? Are we all inherently good? And like, just like society being the way it is and governments make us bad, right? So there's this guy named Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who's very French, who lived in like the 1800s, right? He said, man is born free and everywhere is in chains. Like the idea that human beings are born good and flawless and perfect in nature, and it's only through social constructs and government imposing laws and us being around other people that we become evil, right? We usually become evil because other people have property we don't have, so we envy them and want to take it from them, so we be able to club and take it, and we're bad, right? So if there was like no government, if we go back to like the state of nature, right, everybody would be just great and perfect and lovely, and there'd be no problems. That was his idea. Right, this guy named John Locke, who like founded like a lot of the ideas that America and Western philosophy is based on. It says, okay, we're all basically giant jackasses and pieces of crap, right? And the only way we stop from being told pieces of crap is through restraining ourselves, if not through like personal discipline and like, you know, just trying really hard not to be terrible, then by laws that restrict us from being totally terrible, right? If you like didn't have laws and restrictions and discipline, you'd be like Mad Max. You'd be like roaming bands of marauders driving like SUVs out in the middle of nowhere and like clubbing each other for cans of gas. Right? That's like the idea on the locking side. So what do we think about this? Is it true? Like how are we as a default position? This is a basic question about personal philosophy too, right? Like, y'all think people are inherently good? Y'all think people are inherently bad? Y'all think people are inherently meh? Okay. So like nature or nurture more than nature, right? None of us are inherently anything. Just like it all depends.
I feel like you're taught by your parents, your morals and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying you don't have parents like that or anything like that, because sometimes it happens.
Sure.
But it's harder to grow up and teach yourself those things.
So we're inherent like
Morals and everything like that. And like a lot of times your parents teach you those things and you don't have parents and another figure to teach you those things. You have to like learn them yourself.
sure. So like we get our nurturing education about morals and how to treat other people, right, from some source, right? Whether it's parents or grandparent or you know whoever raises us, right? Whoever raises a person, right, gives them those basic senses of right and wrong and morals, right? As opposed to like feral children who are running off in the wilderness and like dancing with wolves or whatever, right? That's a different thing, right? The idea would be that they would have like either no sense of morality or like a wolfy sense of morality, right? So that's not really ever like happened successfully. There was like a couple of kids who like during the 1800s were like let loose in like the country in India, and like the wolves like didn't eat them, but they weren't like point being that like morality, right, and what we think is right or wrong is socially determined to some extent. We're taught morals as we grow up. As we grow raised, we learn our way to interact with other people, right? We learn right and wrong. Right? The question is then whether or not that's the way we should have society, right? Like, do we need that? If there was not that structure, if there was not somebody teaching us right and wrong, or somebody not teaching us what the government wanted us to think was right and wrong, would it be freeing or would it be more like damaging? What do you think? Like, if there was, the government didn't have laws, there's nothing that was illegal or legal or mandated, right? We still had parents or grandparents or aunts or whoever to teach us stuff. How would morality change? Like, what would we taught differently, you think? How much of what we learn that's right and wrong is because the government says it's, against the law, or how much of it's actually because it's a moral thing to do? Huh? Sure. Usually those parents smoked weed back in their day too. Right. So that's kind of the point he's raising, right? If something is illegal, does that make it immoral? If something is legal, does that make it moral? What do you think? Right.
Your parents could teach you you have to pay something even though it's not. And you're gonna inherit that because that's what they want.
Sure.
If your parents tell you no, don't smoke weed, and you go smoke weed, they're probably gonna discipline you for it. But if they smoke weed and they say it's okay for you to do it and do it, you're not gonna get in trouble.
Right. Right.
Even if it is illegal, but it's not illegal everywhere.
True. So the point is that's the point, right? Is like, is something wrong because you're punished for it, or is something wrong because it's wrong? No, it doesn't.
Like, no matter how my parents raised me, I'm not how they want to be raised.
Right. No, definitely. People disobey their parents all the time. Like, that's kind of what people do, right? Like, you look at, even like, if you look at the Bible, right? God's like, don't eat the freaking apple. What's the first thing? They eat the apple. Right? Even if you take it as an allegory, you don't believe in the Bible or Adam and Eve or anything, it's like, human beings usually do exactly what they're told not to do most of the time. Right? So they make it more and more and more. Say what? Right. It's, and goes back to further, like, what's your personal philosophy? Not to re-entrench it again. Like, how do you look at things? Huh? Right. Everybody has a different set of morals. Right. And you can always have that be different or the same as your parents or make individual choices, right? Yeah. No, I agree. So what he's saying, though, he's worried about the danger of that. He's worried about the fact that if we are all allowed to make our own free choices, have our own sense of morality by being unlimited in the freedom we can like be exposed to, what would that mean for society? Like, how wrong could we take things, right? Like, how crazy could we become by having ultimate freedom, right? That's his concern. He's like, in the Soviet Union, everybody's poor and is beat down by the police. People are starving, they don't have any grain, but like nobody's breaking the law. Maybe it's because like the secret police will come and shoot you in the back of the head in the basement of a building. Right? Maybe that's the reason too, right? But okay, that's what he's arguing, right? Okay. The press too, right? The press too, of course, enjoys the widest freedom. I shall be using the word press to include all media, but what sort of use does it make of this freedom? Here again, the main concern is not to be infringed upon the letter of the law. There is no true moral responsibility for defamation, or disproportion. What sort of responsibility does a journalist or a newspaper have to his readers, or to his history, or to history, if they are misled public opinion or the government by inaccurate information or wrong conclusions? Do we know of any case of public recognition and rectification of such mistakes by the same journalist in the same newspaper? It hardly ever happens because it would damage sales. A nation may be the victim of such a mistake, but the journalist usually gets away with it. A journalist usually gets away with it. One may safely assume that he will start writing the opposite with renewed self-assurance. So you're saying like, there's no accountability in the media. I mean, this is like 78, right? Like fake news was not a thing. Right? They're saying like, okay, New York Times runs a story that says like aliens have landed in New Mexico in Roswell, right? Like it's happening. Everybody's like, everyone's seen aliens. Like there's none of that going on. The government's like, oh, the Kansas City Chiefs win the Super Bowl the next day. Nobody cares anymore, right? If they don't have to go back and reprint, like, oh, we were wrong, we lied about this thing, right? It says the journalist himself, right, is trying to sell paper. The journalist is trying to sell articles. Now they're trying to get clicks on Twitter or on Facebook or like the Washington Post or like Fox News, whatever, right? They want followers. They want to be as sensational as possible, right? So what kind of like accountability is there for disseminating false information? Even in 78, he's like, it's not really accountability at all because the next day they'll just come back and say, okay, like, Vietnam's terrible. And they'll come back the next day, Vietnam's great. And nobody's like, oh, you said the opposite thing yesterday. We don't have imaginations and like memories long enough to actually hold people accountable, is what he's saying, right? That's kind of the danger of the media as he sees it in 78, right? All right. So read the next paragraph for me here. Maybe. If I can scroll down. What the heck? Yeah. Because instant. Somebody see the because instant right there? Yeah. Incredible information, volunteer, I'll have a victim. Oh, well, we don't want to have that happen. That'd be embarrassing. Oh, you can read it again. Simulate. What's it saying here? So let me paraphrase that. Translate that into contemporary English. Right, they just give you like Pravda, right? It was like information from the state, whether it was true or false, right? It was the state's line of BS, right? They did that. Right, they're like unplug the internet, right? Get off social media, whatever. Yeah. True.
Like their elementary stuff was off the grid, like they chose to be off the grid, so they have to deal with anything that would stress them out or like I guess narcissism.
Yeah, or like so definitely. I think there's been like a lot of studies recently about like social media, especially in like the last like 6 years or so, and like its effect on people's mental health, right? And, like people who are like on social media all the time have like some negative mental health repercussions, like higher rates of depression, higher rates of suicide, higher rates of anxiety, higher rates of like just about everything that's like not good, right? Like the one thing they don't have an increase is like positive self-image, right? And that's social media. So this is way before the internet. This is before cable, right? You had 4 networks in America at this point, or 3: CBS, ABC, and NBC. That's it, right? The president was giving a speech about anything, like your football game you were watching on Sunday got canceled, and you're watching the president speak. That's how like limited the media was, right? And so he's saying here, right, that the idea that we're all entitled to know everything, and everybody wants to know like what Princess Diana is doing, or like let's get reality TV, let's say, right, like Kardashians, right? Like, what good is that doing society, in his view, right? I've never seen the Kardashians. I know who some of them are. There's a lot of them in here, right? I don't know. Entertaining, okay. In what way has it been entertaining? What does it show you about life? Like, what's it? I mean, what? Seriously, if it's entertaining, cool. What about it is entertaining? I've never seen it. The gossip. Okay. Dramatic. Okay. So you like did vicariously see other people be dramatic or funny, I guess, right? Okay. Is it a truth perspective, you think? You think that's how like stuff actually is? Okay. You still going? Okay. Sorry. Wow. Okay. So it's like a full like life progression, right? You're not a serial killer now either, right? That's good. Okay. Well, fair enough. Fair enough. That's interesting, right? Okay. All right. So there are some decisions and some actions, right, that are supposed to be protected and not anybody's right to know other than your own, right? Right? But apparently there are some people or some issues, right, that he says, and I think through the press seems like there is unlimited access to and need to know about, right? Like, you know, stuff with national security, like Snowden again, to go back to him, like release a bunch of national security stuff to WikiLeaks or whatever, right? Like the fact that we have drones and are storing everybody's information. Like, okay, cool. It was a crappy program. I'm glad he did that. We should have been doing that. We're still doing that. Nobody seems to care anymore, right? But yeah, the idea that everybody's privacy is like intruding, right? So that other people can know things about them that maybe they don't want known. Like, so if like the government was like collecting all the COVID cases, right? Just publish a list of here's everybody who's ever had COVID in the United States, right? Or publish the log or registry from Planned Parenthood or from like a rabies vaccination clinic or like whatever, right? Like that would be a problem in his estimation here, right? Because like there's a right not only not to have your rights violated, but like how much better would it be is your life, like as a student or whatever, if you didn't know, you know, everything in the world that you know because of the news. Like, how is your focus determined by how much other extra crap is out there floating around, right? I mean, an example of this might be, okay, like I have a quiz for biology while I'm trying to study up on Twitter, and Donald Trump said, well, blah, 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 blah. And here's 8 million people reacting to what Donald Trump said, right? And like, okay, it was probably outrageous and probably ill-informed. And the people who are following things are saying it means that and more and whatever. And so you have like a 3-hour thing about one thing that was said, right? And now you're not studying for biology quiz anymore. You're like worked up because like the world is ending because this guy said some jackass thing, right? Like, I guess it's good to know that he said that in some way, but also like, it doesn't seem to me like there should be so much attention to like people talking about what other people said. Like, you have a 4-hour story because somebody said something, right? Like, yeah, damn right, report what somebody said, right? Especially in a position of power, report everything they say. We don't need like 85 people telling you what they think they said and what that means, right? I think that there's a notion of having our rights to not know, right? He's talking about like inflicted by people giving their opinions on people's speech. Does that make sense? Like, we have a right to know what he's saying. He's the president. But like, I don't know. That's a lot, and I need to study for my biology test. All right. Hastiness and superficiality are the psychic disease of the 20th century. The 21st century, I don't know. And more than anywhere else, this disease is reflected in the press, such as it is. However, the press has become the greatest power within the Western countries, more powerful than legislative power, the executive, the judiciary. And one would then like to ask, well, what law has it been enacted, and to whom is it responsible? In the communist East, the journalist is frankly appointed as a state official. But who has granted Western journalists their power, and for how long a time? With what prerogatives, right? Like, people doing the news in Russia, right, at this time are Stalin appointing people. Like, okay, you're now the czar of media control and propaganda. Go do propaganda, right? So everybody knows who the media is. Everybody knows who the media is just towing Stalin's line, right? You don't do them interviews where you say Stalin's bad, or you'll be shot in the basement of Lubyanka the next morning, right? I mean, that's just how it goes. And they're never going to say anything Russia did was bad. Like Chernobyl, nuclear reaction meltdown, thousands of people got radioactive poisoning, millions of people died. France got like covered with nuclear dust. Like, didn't happen, right? No big deal. It was like a vacation weekend, right? Why? Because that's what the state said. He's saying the same thing happens here largely, but without any kind of accountability or knowledge. It's like people in the press are doing that, right? For example, you look at the way like the Iraq War was covered. I know y'all were young and not like wilding out pacifiers, emails being like, look, the Iraq War, weapons of mass destruction. But like, we were all told Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, right? Turns out we went there and not a lot of weapons of mass destruction there, right? Now, we knew they had some, to be honest, because we sold them to them like 10 years before, but those had apparently disappeared. But right, so the idea is that what the journalists are covering, right, and who gave them the power to decide what the narrative is a lie in America, right? Like, we have people who are like Fox News is straight down the center, like exact truth. We have people who are like CNN is straight down the center, exact truth, right? And it's like, probably none of those is true. Probably everybody's a little slanted in what they're saying, right? But I mean, when I say something, even in class, right, I'm trying to be as objective as I can. I probably color things and shade things a certain way just because I have my opinions, right? And the fact that like people don't announce what team they're on or what like jersey they're wearing, right, is a problem, he says, in the West. Whereas in Russia, they're like, yep, go Team Stalin, right? So he thinks like honesty and transparency together, perhaps, right? All right. There is yet another surprise for someone coming from the East, where the press is rigorously unified. One gradually discovers a common trend of preferences within the Western press as a whole. is a fashion. There are generally accepted patterns of judgment. There may be common corporate interests, to some effect being not competition but unification. Enormous freedom exists for the press, but none for the readership, because the newspapers mostly develop stress and emphasis to those opinions which do not openly contradict their own and the general trend. Like that's another right? Like if there's a certain way to talk about a certain issue that's important, right? That's what's going to get coverage. Why? Because everybody else is covered, right? If you're a national news publication and the Iraq war is going on, you're going to talk about the roadside bomb that killed 20 soldiers in Iraq that day. And so is New York Times, so is the Washington Post, so is the AP, so is Fox News, so is CNN, right? And so there's no care about what's actually going on that's different in like municipalities, right? Like say that, a fireman saved 20 kittens who were thrown in a river in a burlap sack that morning, right? Like nobody knows about that because they're talking about the same story that every other press media is covering, right? And that means like the stuff like a diversity, people covering what they care about as a news outlet, they want to cover the same things because that's the story that everybody's expected to know from the national media. Does that make sense, Ryan? Like even though there's supposed to be freedom to do whatever, the freedom is annulled by the fact that there's competition to tell the same story better, right? Does that make sense? At least what he's saying. You have to agree with it. I think it's true though, like largely. All right. Okay. Without any censorship in the Western fashionable trends of thought and ideas are carefully separated from those which are not fashionable. Nothing is forbidden, but what is not fashionable will hardly ever find its way to the periodicals or books or be heard in colleges. Legally, your researchers are free, but they are contained by the fashions of the day. There is no open violence such as in the East. However, a selection dictated by fashion and the need to match mass standards frequently prevent independent-minded people from giving their countrymen, or their contribution rather, to public life. There's a dangerous tendency to flock together and show off successful development. I've received letters in America from highly intelligent persons, maybe a teacher in a faraway small college, who could do much for the renewal and salvation of this country. This country cannot hear him because the media are not interested in him. This gives birth to strong mass prejudices, to blindness, which is the most dangerous in our dynamic era. There is, for instance, a self-deluding interpretation of the contemporary world situation. It works like a sort of petrified armor around people's minds. Human voices from 17 countries of Eastern Europe and Eastern Asia cannot pierce it. It will only be broken by the pitiless crowbar of events. Yeah. What's he saying? I can translate it. That's a long paragraph, right? All right, let's bring it down. This is what's reported in the media, right? Or what's told as like knowledge, right? Is accepted by the people who are gatekeepers for knowledge, like public school teachers first, right? And teach you a certain history of America, right? Like let's look at like the school books were taught in the 50s and 60s and 70s, right? Like they have Martin Luther King Jr. in them? Probably not. They have anything about Black history in them? Probably not. Most definitely not. About Chicano history? No, they didn't. It was like Johnny Appleseed, the founding fathers, and like Hoorah America, and that's about it, right? Nothing complicated stuff, nothing about Jim Crow, nothing about anything, right? And so what happens is people who are raised in that era only have that narrative, right? And so anything contradicts that narrative, like the truth, right? It's all of a sudden this petrified armor against, well, that's not the way it is. It couldn't have been that way, right? That's what happens if a society that reflects that then, right? So you have knowledge controlled, right, by the fact that people aren't interested in hearing anything different from what they already know. Right? I think that's true like that, right? If you say something that you don't think, even if it's true, you're concerned with something that's different from what you think or have thought your whole life, right? Like if you were to learn tomorrow that, like, I don't know, there's life on Mars, right? Or that the moon landing was fake, or the world's actually flat. None of that's true. I think it's all false. But like how would that change the way you think of everything, right? Like if everything that you've been thought to think is actually a lie, right? Or the one thing you think is like, true is a lie, then shoot, that kind of throws everything to the wind, right? It's very unstable to you, right? It's the idea that people don't want to hear new opinions or different thoughts, right? Kind of controls growth away from lies. Right? Like you're never going to grow to a truth from a lie if you don't want to hear that is in fact a lie, right? So basically what I'm saying is this is a petrified armor, especially in colleges, right? Because what do people in colleges do for graduate degrees? You get your BA, yeah, good for you. You paid like $45,000 at least, right? You can now get a job at, middle management somewhere. That's good. Everybody should do that. It's great. Get your education. But if you want to go to graduate school, right, what do you have to do for a master's degree? Usually. Write a paper. What's the paper called? Thesis, yeah. Which has to be what? An individual research project. Has to be your own original, thoughtful research contribution to a field or to a discipline, right? It has to be approved by your committee, who are 3 teachers in the department and 1 teacher not in your department, right? You have to then research it according to academic standards and then publish it and pass it by an exam the committee gives you, right? So who's going to be able to get the research approved if it's something entirely different from what the committee thinks? Is that going to produce like free thought or like new ideas or challenging or rocking the boat? Probably not. It's going to be what the committee who's already in charge and already learned are going to approve, right? And so he's saying that the way that the education system is set up, especially for advanced degrees and people who are trying to be the teachers of the next generation, just makes the same lies go round circle again, right? And nobody's thinking newly about things, right? I guess we're out of time, so we'll stop there. We'll continue on next time from right here, and there's only a couple like paragraphs left. Well, a few. We'll get through it though. So, what do you think about the essay so far? Like, it's kind of like crazy language, right? Because he's old and Russian, but like, you think it's still relevant today, somewhat, maybe? Like, did you see this stuff happening today still? Maybe. Maybe. Okay. Well, we'll think through that some more next time. We'll finish the essay next time, and then move on. Nobody commented on the YouTube live stream. What the hell? Just joking.